Hello for the sixth Sunday of Easter, using only the first reading from Acts of the Apostles. Acts of the Apostles 15, verses 1 and 2, and verses 22 to 29. And it deals with the first council in the church, and I'd like to say a few words about the last council in the church. The older people here or listening to this have experienced the last one, Vatican II. It took place in 1962 to 1965. And the younger people have never experienced a council in the church. But today, in the reading of Acts of the Apostles, we see sort of the first or the most basic council in the history of the church, found there in Acts 15. And the apostles and the religious leaders and so forth were meeting in Jerusalem around the year 50 AD, 20 years after Christ died, and they were talking about serious issues in the church. And so since then, we have had all kinds of councils, in fact, 21 councils since 50 AD. I'm just going to give you a dozen names. 2 in Nicaea in the year 325. 4 in Constantinople, present Istanbul, in 331. 1 in Ephesus in the Holy Land in 431. 1 in Chalcedon in 451. 5 different ones in the Vatican in the Lateran in 1123 in the Middle Ages. Lyon, France. Venice, Austria. Constance, Germany. Trent, back in Italy, the biggest council in 1560s. And then the First Vatican Council in 1869, that's where they, for the first time, declared that the Pope was infallible. 1869. And then finally, the one that I experienced is 1962 to 65, that back in Rome. But today's Acts of the Apostles are talking about days of new Christians coming in the church, not just Jews, but the Gentile world. It was a big deal. If you came and followed Christ, did you have to be circumcised like the male Jews? And then did all of the Mosaic laws apply to these people the way it applies to the Jewish nation? Well, the bottom line is, they said males did not need to be circumcised, and only some or most of the Mosaic laws. Too complicated to go into that. But that was the first council in the history of the church, and then we have had these 21 since, and as I say, the last one, Vatican II. And the Vatican II took place when I studied in Europe. I studied in Europe 1961 to 65. And the council was 1962 to 65. And we were totally involved in that because our professors and theologians were involved in that, and the world was involved in that, and we sort of had an insight into that. And I think we were made and trained to be Vatican II priests, or that's how we studied our theology. In fact, the bishops would come into Rome, but they would also invite expert theologians to come to keep them on track. Get that? The bishops asked theologians to keep them on track. They were called periti, or peritus, the singular, an expert in theology. Well, our hero theologian, Karl Rahner, was one of those experts who advised the bishops in the Second Vatican Council. And so during this time of these years, 4 or 5 years, there were many opinions, many insights, much anger, much joy, a breath of fresh air. And of course, the way we have today, there were the conservatives and the liberals. Well, in general, the conservative people are older. They like it the way it used to be. And the liberals were many of the younger, and they would like to change it and make it better. No different. Both conservatives and liberals are important to the church. Well, the Pope called this Vatican II Council One day when he was outside of the Vatican and he was in another church, it's called St. Paul's outside the walls. And when he was with all these cardinals and bishops and so forth in the sacristy, he came up, or revelation, a new idea. The church needs to be more relevant in the modern world. And Pope John the 23rd, who was Pope in 1958 to 63, he calls the Second Vatican Council. He dies in the middle of it, and Paul VI come on in 1963 to 78, and he tries to finish it off and start it and bring it about in the church. And then when he dies, John Paul I, get this, he was only Pope for 25 days, from September the 3rd until the 28th in 1978, and they loved him. I remember hearing a taxi cab driver telling us, all of Rome loved this man, Pope Paul I, and he was only there for 25 days. Well, then the big jolly athlete, John Paul II, comes, and he stays for 26, 27 years, and he brings the council about, and also they start to pull back. And then Benedict comes in 2005 to 2013 when he resigned, and it got much more strict. And now we have a new Pope, Francis, 2013 to today. And I think our present Pope, Francis, has not called any council, has not changed any doctrine, who is a solid conservative, but I think he has changed the atmosphere of the church today. Where we in the church have been too judgmental, now we need to be more non-judgmental. He has a deep love and concern for the poor and the outcast. He stresses mercy, not strict justice. And he's sort of returning to that emphasis of conscience. Who am I to judge? That was projected in the Vatican II Council. I don't know about you, but I find our church today, I am more excited about our church today than ever before. What about you? Do you listen to the church and help the church form your conscience? And take personal responsibility for what you do, because God's the only one who's going to judge you. So you take these two elements of conscience, what the law says or what the church says, and what I think and what I know and what I believe, and you bring these two together and you run your life. With the help of Jesus, with the help of your parents, with the help of reason, with the help of the church, you form your conscience and take responsibility and live the message of Jesus. I find it exciting to look back 20 years after Christ died and was crucified and rose again and see what they did then 2,000 years earlier. I find it exciting to see what we're doing now. The Spirit is alive in the church today. I'm excited. Are you? Have a good day.